32. With dawn at last upon them, the wilds around them seemed alive with potential threats. The area around the relay station was densely packed with trees and huge boulders, making seeing anything but the closest vicinity impossible. Chesney explained the path they were most likely going to be taking. The area around Rayold was essentially a massive island north of the Naisquat continent. Beyond this forest was a swamp, followed by a huge bay. They would need to follow the shore of it west to an old bridge, cross the water there to get past a series of impassable mountains, then continue following the bay's shore to the north and then east, where the town should be tailed. It sounded like an awful lot of ground to cover in a single day, but nobody wanted to be stuck camping here overnight, and they did have a very early start. Things didn't seem so bad at first. Very brief encounters with things that looked like much more vicious pack rats. But it was soon evident that what they had encountered was merely there to test their strength. Incredibly, the small rodents had been gently easing them into a certain direction. Just as they thought they were free of the forest and were about to enter the swamp, disaster struck. It was an ambush. Dozens of the strong, vicious creatures descended upon them at once, closing the distance and making area of effect skills almost useless, as they could very easily hit each other. Their fangs and claws easily found the gaps in their armor, and taking the time to deal with one only allowed two more to jump on their backs or legs.
"I don't have time for this,"
Chesney yelled, frustrated at how much more difficult this encounter was being than it should have.
"Everybody who can, use freeze,"
he shouted. He, Midia, and Mouth all used the time magic granted to them by Sphere, and suddenly all of the creatures froze in place, or fell off of them like statues. They all ran to the outside edge of the massive swarm. Chesney's face darkened.
This was not the day to get in my way.
His hand extended out, and the entire clearing where they had been attacked was engulfed in flames.
"Feel free to chime in,"
Lily growled, and added her own fire to his. Midia and Mouth did the same, but with lightning. When they were done, and time resumed for these creatures, they were all instantly turned to ash, and the whole clearing was nothing but a blackened hole.
"Serves those little bastards right,"
Lily said, inspecting her body.
"I think I'm going to be finding little stuck teeth in me all day." "So what were those things before? Just regular pack rats?"
Midia asked, trying to understand the depth of Kmat's power and influence here.
"Yeah, pack rats are stubborn, but not this stubborn,"
Chesney replied.
"Those teeth went right through this material, too. These were stronger and much smarter creatures than used to be here. Everyone be on your guard in the wetlands ahead. It's going to be slow going. You know, I've never been up this way myself. What other kinds of creatures did you say used to be here?"
Mouth asked.
"I didn't. I just know it wasn't very safe out here. We hired a traveling mercenary to escort us to the relay station when I was sent to the magic school. I remember some kinds of large lizard-looking things. Beyond that, I don't know." "I know peace,"
Lily offered.
"Though honestly, I don't know how much it will keep creatures this strong away." "Well, anything you can do, please try it."
They then entered the swamp. It was beyond slow going. Much like the final trek to Dober, the way was often unclear, and dry spots to walk upon were rare. Many times they had to decide between almost swimming through muck, or turning back, and looking for a new way around.
"Oh wow, it's, surprisingly hot up here in Naisquat,"
Lily said tiredly. The sun wasn't fully in the sky yet, but the air was heating up quickly, and the horizon filled with low pools of fog coming off the cool water. Chesney shrugged.
"Really? I feel like this is actually more cold than I'm used to. Probably because we're surrounded by water. If you think this is hot, I'd love to show you Ligon,"
Midia said.
"It was a little touristy, but after all my time, freezing my toes off in Karen, I could spend a whole year there just soaking up the sun. And the food was amazing too. Ugh, now you just reminded me I haven't eaten yet."
Chesney stopped and both girls ran into his back.
"Actually, you're right. We haven't eaten."
He looked around, not looking satisfied with his options for stopping.
If we find someplace solid to sit down on, let's get a bite.
The next while they spent trekking, they kept an eye out for anything remotely suitable.
Mouth
said, looking off to something nearby.
That spot looks a bit higher off the water table than the other mounds we've been by.
They made their way over to it.
Huh.
Lily said.
Yeah, it's higher, but how the heck do we even get up there? It's too steep.
She started pawing at the sides of the steep incline, trying to find perches to climb.
Ah, hold on, I think I got it. What?
She shouted in surprise when the mountain she had been climbing rolled, taking her with it and pulling her upright. She held on for dear life and then looked up to find a huge pale lizard face snarling at her. It looked like one of those gigantic bronzes, only this one was completely white. It had been able to hide in the marshes by being covered in a thin layer of mud, but the dry parts they'd been unable to see until now were sickly white. But there was nothing sick or weak about this thing.
Lily!
Chesney yelled.
Jump off, hurry!
He quickly unsheathed his sword and tried to wade forward. But before anyone could bridge the distance, the creature snapped its jaws and sparks formed. Oh no, it's going to cook her alive.
Put up your shield,
he screamed. Stunned as she was able to bring up her shield just in time. But to everyone's surprise, the creature didn't breathe fire. Instead, a blinding flash of light struck her and blasted her through the air, screaming in surprise and pain. She left a smoking trail as she soared through the air, then splashed down in a distant body of water.
Mouth! Go get her,
he ordered.
Midia, give me a hand with this.
Mouth ran off as fast as he could in the direction Lily had flown off to, and Midia pressed a hand at Chesney, filling him with strength, before she took her whip from her belt. Chesney leapt up, but from the position he was in, he couldn't get far. So, he stabbed his sword into the leg of the creature and used it as a handhold to try to climb. It didn't go in as far as it would have if it had been Cormu's sword, which was hard to get used to, but he did his best to adjust it. The bulbous body of the creature was covered in hard white scales, and mostly immovable despite the 3 pairs of legs and small grasping arms, but the long neck of it was more than capable of reaching and dealing with any threats to it. The pale creature jerked its leg and dove its head to snap at Chesney, but Midia cracked her whip close to its head, which startled it enough to turn to her instead. Another bolt of light blasted forward and struck her, and she was jolted enough she lost control of her muscles and dropped into the muck. Quick as a whip, the thing's tail then snapped up out of the water and cracked against her chest. Midia cried out as she felt the bones in her chest shatter.
That's enough of that,
Chesney yelled, finally making his way up on top of its body and twirling his sword in his hand. With 2 quick snaps of his arm, 2 slices opened up at the base of its neck, spraying dark blood everywhere and revealing pearly white bones. It snarled in response, then snapped its jaws closed and started to roar. A light was building, shining through the thick scales of its throat, and it pointed straight up in the air.
That's not good.
Midia activated her shield and gasped from the pain of her bones, knitting themselves back together. Mouth came running back into the clearing, a blackened and angry Lily right at his heels.
I'll kill that thing,
she yelled in frustration.
Everyone get down,
Chesney yelled, stabbing his sword into the creature and getting down to his knees. In the next moment, the energy that was building erupted when it opened its jaws once more in an earth-shaking roar. A huge ball of lightning fired into the air, and then an impossible-to-dodge array of lightning strikes struck at everything in the area. All of them were struck to varying degrees, but it wasn't enough to stop them. Mouth was not happy.
Alright, let's see how tall you are after this,
he growled, then took his greatsword in a powerful 2-handed slash to the closest leg. The slice went deep and lodged in the bone. The beast howled and tipped forward, its long neck splashing into the swamp. On either side of it, Midia and Lily used their whips to strike at its neck and hold it down.
Now Chesney,
Midia called. Chesney, having kept his balance from the sword he'd plunged into its body, quickly stood and ran along the length of the neck. He leapt into the air and plunged his sword right through its eye and straight into its brain. Instantly it stopped struggling and slackened. A strange gurgle escaped as the air in its lungs deflated.
What the hell was that thing? It's like a bronza on steroids.
Lily shouted incredulously as she uncoiled the whip from the thing's neck. Chesney retrieved his sword, disgust plain on his face as gloopy eye fluids dripped all over his hand and arm. He looked back at its body.
Well, at least we have some place to eat now.
Awkwardly, they climbed onto the huge body and made use of it to make a small camp, cleaned up enough to make some porridge mixed with slices of dried fruit.
How far do you think we've come so far?
Medea asked him. At the question, he swiveled his neck around to the south, then the north.
I'm guessing we're a quarter of the way there. At this rate, we won't be there by nightfall.
Mouth warned.
Well, once we're out of the swamp, it will go faster. It shouldn't be much farther now until we can pick up the pace.
After they broke camp, Lily stuck close to Mouth and asked him all kinds of questions. Mostly polite questions about some of his travels, but Chesney got the feeling she was still incredibly curious about Lubots in general. He couldn't really blame her. Everything about the man was fascinating. In any other circumstance, he'd love to take a look through his sketchbook. Maybe if the world wasn't destroyed, she could talk to Fritz or Fastjo, or even go visit Dober. But he was too preoccupied with thoughts of home to really be distracted by such thoughts. He knew that creature they just fought was not something he'd ever seen in the area, or heard about back home, which meant this whole region had turned utterly deadly, isolating Raold, just as he feared. They were a fishing village and fairly self-sufficient, but that didn't mean they didn't need to go find doctors and other things. Were they trapped? Had they been overrun? He couldn't discount the very real possibility that it had crumbled from within too, just as Ratzerk had. He couldn't think about it, forced himself to put it from his mind. If he started dwelling on it now, he would get sloppy. He'd already let Lily get hurt from not noticing the danger. From now on, he told himself, he needed to keep them well away from anything suspicious. This wasn't the time to let it all fall apart, especially now that he could finally breathe again after escaping Dahlgren's area of influence. Back then, every lungful he could taste iron on his breath. Indistinct whispers had filled his mind, and it had been so hard to just stay focused enough to not snap at absolutely nothing on the walk to Ratzerk. As long as he had a destination, he could keep moving. As noon approached, there was a new feeling in the air. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing on end, and he could not shake the feeling they were being watched. Being stalked. Then he heard it. A roar, way off in the distance, somewhere off to the north, maybe a bit east. He had a bad feeling, but led them a bit more southwest than purely west as they had been traveling. When the western breach finally came in sight, he thought they were home free. Then he heard another roar, this time closer, and to the southwest. Then he knew they were being herded. The only question was, could they escape the trap? That bridge was not close.
I know you're thinking running to the bridge, but I think we need to find some place with better footing and wait for them to come to us.
Medea said.
There is at least 2 of them, and judging by the sound, they're bigger and faster than us, and I don't want to fight completely out of breath.
It was a good idea. He nodded.
Okay, let's head back to that one mostly dry spot from a few minutes back. Then, get ready.
They ran back to a spot where they at least could stand without risk of falling, and got out their weapons. Medea raised their speed, and then increased Chesney's strength and defense. Before she could do anything else, the ground shook with approaching stomping footfalls, and roars sounded through the air. Chesney cursed when he saw what came over the hill. It was like the fire sores from the Karen snowfields, but they had a different coloration. Rather than the bright blood-red scales, these were dark purple. It was somehow even bigger than that monster. And it had a hunting partner. The 2 monstrously large beasts towered over them from the small hill they had approached from. Both roared so loud that the waters around them trembled, and then they swooped down to attack them.
Mouth, focus on that one. Lily, watch his back. Medea, be scary. Shout if you need backup.
Everyone yelled out their understanding, and he leapt forward to take on the closest creature. It stayed in a position in the water he could not easily reach without losing his advantage. So he did the next best thing. He thrust out his hand, and an arc of twisted reality blasted forward and slapped the huge thing in the face. It hardly seemed damaged, but now it was very mad. Its throat glowed with some light within, and in the next moment an intensely focused blast of blue flames erupted from its mouth, chasing him across the hill he stood upon. The noise was incredible, and all moisture in the air seemed to dissipate completely under the onslaught. Not fast enough to avoid it, he dove backwards through the beam to fake out the creature. The pain was indescribable. His skin bubbled and went numb where it had been exposed, but he had avoided the full brunt of it.
"I can do that too, buddy,"
he yelled, then blasted it in the side with a white-hot blast of his own. The beast howled in pain, one spot on its side completely blackening, blood and fat dripping.
"Chesney!"
It was Lilia.
"I need you." "I'm coming."
He dashed in the direction of her voice. Saw a mouth, his sword buried deep and stuck in the underbelly of the second dark fire sore. Lily snapping her whip at the beast's face, keeping it focused on her. Where was Midia?
"There. Help her,"
Lily called, gesturing with her head. The beast was standing in the water, and two familiar hands were clawing at one of its legs. Midia was pinned underneath its huge foot, underwater. He let loose a desperate, furious yell, and dashed through the water like it was air. One swipe, he sliced open a gash under its neck, and the next slash severed the tendons at the back of its leg. It fell on them both, and he put up his shield and braced for the impact. With the added strength he had been given, he was just able to keep them both from being crushed.
"Lily, get her out,"
he yelled, straining under the incredible weight. He could see the other beast he'd left alone charging in from the direction he'd left. But Mouth was there, without his sword, blasting it away with a snowstorm. Lily ran through the water and dragged Midia out from under him. She was gasping and sputtering, and her leg was twisted, but she was alive. Free now to get up, Chesney dropped the weight, slicing along its belly as he moved to join Mouth.
"I got this. Go get your sword,"
Chesney yelled, leaping high into the air to try to stab his sword into the creature's eye. The blow didn't hit the mark, and Chesney was sent flying when it snapped its jaws on his arm, and he was shaken like a doll. He slammed into wet, swampy ground. Saw the thing turn away from him and want to join its mating. But Chesney could also see they were not ready yet to go 2 on 3. Mouth was still trying to free his sword, and Lily was focused on helping Midia. So he blasted it with a bolt of lightning, right at the back of its head.
"I'm not done with you yet."
It snarled and stepped his way, whipping its tail down in a furious attack that slammed down on him and cracked his ribs and broke his arm.
"That all you got?"
He coughed and blasted it with lightning again. That made it mad. Too mad. It stomped over to him and stepped on his leg and pinned him there. There was a sickened crunch as his tibia snapped in half and his knee was destroyed. He screamed, and his one free hand couldn't help but claw at the ground while he wailed in agony. The beast wasn't done, though. It lowered its head and opened its mouth. Light glowed through its throat. It was going to cook him. Instinctively, he threw up his one working arm and blasted his white-hot fire up at the open maw, just as its own focused blue-hot fire rained down upon him. He could hear nothing over the crackling, roaring fires as they burned into each other, and each force strained against the other. Chesney had no idea how long this creature could keep up the attack, but he knew his reserves were already low, and he had a definite time limit. Already he could feel the embers of his life feeding the spell growing weaker, could feel the heat of the huge, monstrous lizard's breath inching closer to him. There are a lot of emotions a person can draw on in desperate times. The need to protect others, knowing you can't fall here, seeing loved ones again, pure survival. But for Chesney in that moment, it was just incredulous rage. On the day his life had changed forever, he had felt flames unlike any other. An infinite, inextinguishable fire so terribly bright and hot that nothing could protect you from it. A fire so intense and full, it stole the very air you would breathe before you could scream. He absolutely refused to fall to something as pathetic as this fire before him. He scooped up the last of his life and pushed it all into his own life's flame, willed it to push back and make this creature understand what real fire was. And push back it did. Slowly, inexorably, the stalemate was being overwhelmed by Chesney's flames. It pressed back, forcing the creature's fire back into its own throat. The roaring, crackling flames got louder, and there were other noises he could not place. But it all stopped when at last the fires burst through the back of its throat, and out the other end, showering him and the whole hill in bloody, smoking chunks of flesh and bone. It collapsed, somehow missing him, and he cut off the fire before he died. The shifting weight of the creature pushed him sideways through the mud, and he was at least no longer crushed beneath it. With agonizing patience, he felt along his numb, broken arm, searching for the button nails had showed him. He didn't feel any pain, which he knew was not a good sign. His vision was darkening, but he tried to remain calm, focusing entirely on the goal of finding and pressing the button. There. His helmet chirped, and the transparent visor came alive for just a moment with colorful displays he could not understand, but he was pretty sure seeing a lot of red was probably a bad thing. Seconds later, pain surged through his body like a tidal wave, with a cooling feeling right after it. He grit his teeth and bore the sounds of his bones snapping back into place, and the just as disgusting the second-time sound of his knee reforming and turning the right way again. He grudgingly turned over and pushed himself out of the mud, searching to find Medea and the others. There, the sounds of battle ongoing. He stood and ran. His knee didn't quite feel right, but by now none of his body did. When he found them, there was a moment of confusion. There was a dead monster there, pockmarked by lightning and a mostly severed neck. Yet they were still fighting. While Chesney had been dealing with one, those three had been set upon by a third. No wonder they hadn't been able to come after him. Lily was on its back, whip coiled around its neck, as she tried to pull it away from the attacks it was trying to make. Mouth and Medea were taking turns dodging out of the way of its tail and attacking its legs. Chesney would end this right now.
Lily, pull it up,
he yelled, flashing his sword and leaping up him. She redoubled her efforts and strained, pulling the head back, exposing the neck. Taking advantage of his surprise arrival, he slashed down on the neck, this time slicing through bone, and he was sprayed in a thick deluge of steaming blood. The creature fell, and spilled its life into the muddy swamp. The water over where the head fell bubbled in a red froth, and was soon silent. At that, he collapsed to his knees, completely out of breath. The water came up to his neck, and he let the cold seep into him.
Medea,
he croaked.
You okay?
She shambled over to him, looking like a drowned pack rat, and coughed before she could properly speak.
Yeah, mostly. I swallowed a lot of water.
She knelt down into the water as well.
How about you?
She looked at him with worried eyes. Had she seen what had happened to him? He groaned incoherently.
How about you guys? Mouth, Lily? You okay?
Mouth waded out to him, his bright red armor covered in dirt and blood.
Well, that was sure a sticky spot to be in ill. I'm all right, though.
Lily sloshed his way as well.
I'm all right, boss.
She didn't look all right. Her voice rattled like her lungs were full of fluid. One side of her face was swelling up pretty bad, and she was bleeding from her ear.
Just, give me a sec.
She pressed the button on her shield.
Ow, ow.
She whined at the same time as a muffled cracking sound could be heard.
And, thanks, Medea, for taking that hit for me.
She looked guilty. Chesney got up, already missing the cool piece of the water. They still had walking to do.
I take it that it could have been you pinned under the water.
Lily looked positively ill at the thought.
Yeah.
He put a hand on her shoulder.
Don't sweat it. We're a team. We watch each other.
He looked longingly back at the water. Disgustingly brown and red as it was, he found he just wanted to lie back down there and feel cool and peaceful for just a few more minutes.
Okay, let's keep going.
The bridge wasn't far now, and thankfully there was no great obstacle now to reach it. For being so poorly traveled, it was a well-built and maintained wooden bridge, wide enough for carts to pass one another, with railings on each side. Below, the ocean was close, lapping against the short canyon walls. The water led north, where it would become part of the bay upon which Raoul plied its trade.
"I'm sorry I couldn't return the favor,"
Medea whispered from beside him as they walked, guiltily holding her arms. He really didn't know what to say. He'd never needed an explanation. Fights were awful, chaotic things. Everyone was alive and had all their limbs. That was enough for him. But he knew she wasn't going to be happy with him just saying not to worry about it.
"Don't be. You had your own challenges. We rely on you too much,"
she said eventually.
"Or maybe it's just me."
The truth was, this is how he preferred it. He wanted to take the risks. He wanted to keep everyone safe. That was his job. Wasn't it? He had a niggling feeling he was stepping on something here. But the fastest way to get the answers he wanted was just to talk to her.
"Well, what's so wrong with letting me handle all the dangerous parts? I want to keep everyone safe,"
he said conversationally. She sighed.
"I feel like there's too many ways for me to answer that. We could argue back and forth about you being the least expendable person on this journey, but I know that won't change your mind. So instead, think about how it must feel for everyone else to see you get hurt for their sakes. But not just that. How it must feel knowing that you don't think you can rely on them to do things. I mean, I get it, but it's not like I can consciously just let people get hurt when I know I could step in, just to spare their feelings. That's not what I'm getting at. Ugh, what am I really even getting at? I think I'm just upset that I needed you to save me. You took on one of those things by yourself, while also saving me. I'm stronger than this." "So, you're disappointed in yourself?" "Yeah, I guess so." "Are you disappointed in Lily?" "No, she's still just picking all this up. She was all alone in the world just a few hours ago. Now she's fighting probably the strongest threats I've ever seen. That's no small thing. You cut everyone else slack except yourself. Have you considered you didn't get any sleep? You just tore yourself away from the only home you've ever known, and you've been throwing yourself into danger for months?" "I have. And I also know you still have nightmares, are trying terribly hard not to think about how your home is doing, and have been thrown into even more deadly situations than I have. So why didn't you need rescuing? That's my point. I've let you take on more than your fair share. I need to step up more. All of us do."
She nodded to herself.
"We'll be better, Chesney, I promise."
He tried to say something, but she shushed him.
"No, I'm not going to argue about this. Let's just focus on getting to Raoul." "Okay."
There really was no use arguing. He didn't think they needed to fight any better than they already were, but Medea was always a bit stubborn. After they crossed the bridge, the land was much drier and easier to traverse. They turned north and followed the edge of the huge bay to the east of them. This part he knew well. Could almost see where Raoul should be on the edge of the water all the way around the bay. But he couldn't be sure if there were boats or just waves out there on the water.
"How are you holding up?"
he asked. She laughed in a shrill laugh that told him all he really needed to know.
"Well, almost drowning while getting crushed by a huge lizard sure was effective in keeping my mind off things. How is your body feeling?"
She gave him a somewhat confused look.
"What do you mean?"
He shrugged.
"I don't know. Just I've noticed little things are piling up. After my leg got crushed, my knee still feels a little off. Things like that."
She nodded and looked away.
"Yeah, that spot where I was bleeding out in the snowfields turns numb when I sit down for too long. And that spot where, well, after Lokiarn, I feel like some things just don't quite fit together right. And you know, after everything."
She held a hand over her stomach, reliving some injury.
"I worry sometimes."
So it wasn't just him. As amazing as all this healing magic or technology was, it wasn't perfect. He worried that if things kept up like they had, he'd have the body of an old man by the time he was 20. If he made it that long anyway. It should bother him, but it just didn't.
I don't think there's much more of this journey before us,
he said, putting on his best approximation of reassurance.
And hey, we're young. I'm pretty sure a couple of years of vacation will do us a world of good.
She twisted and cracked her back.
I certainly hope so.
The way was long, but things seemed somewhat less savage over here. All four of them passed the time having light conversation, where it was mostly Mouth sharing some of his stories of ruins he'd explored. Always, though, Chesney kept an eye on the horizon, waiting for that first hint of his home. As sunset loomed, he finally had it. That first glimpse. Boats tied to the pier. Boats on the water. A feeling of relief washed over him. Those were both very good signs. Then all those thoughts he'd been pushing away came rushing back in it. He realized now that he almost had been hoping his mother wasn't going to be there. He missed home terribly, but that feeling was completely overridden by fear. There was some secret she knew, and he had no idea what it would mean for him. Or for Medea. Daphne had seemed very sure they were not siblings, and also that they were not Cormu and Sophie's children. But what did she really know? How could she know those things for sure, when so much of their past was a mystery? Chesney's father. His mother, Neri, had always told him about his father any chance he got. Dorga had been a master fisherman, and someone the whole village had looked up to. Maybe not necessarily an official leader, but the kind of authority that kindness and sense and strength could get you. Had Dorga been a Raigan? Would that explain why people had looked up to him? How he seemed to effortlessly have such influence? There had been many times when Chesney had heard his mother look out over the waves at night when he was supposed to be sleeping, whispering to Dorga, a husband she'd lost to a terrible storm, telling him of their son together.
Say, Chesney?
Medea asked, startling him out of his own thoughts.
What's your mother like?
He looked over, and there was a peculiar look to her he couldn't quite piece together.
Ooh, someone's nervous about meeting their boyfriend's mom.
Lily giggled, squeezing Medea's shoulder and ruffling her hair. Medea turned bright red. Oh, wow, she is nervous, he thought. He hadn't even thought of that being a problem. He'd met her father before ever meeting Medea, so it had never really been awkward. Thus, it hadn't even entered his mind that Medea might have been nervous about arriving at Rayold for entirely different reasons than the obvious one. He was a bit off his feet at the question, but he stammered a bit, trying to think of a response.
Oh. Well, she mostly makes a living helping out the other fishermen with their catches. Though mostly I think they all just want to protect her after Dorga was gone. That's not what I mean. Like, what kind of person is she? Well, she's loud, for one thing. I can hear her yelling at me from across town.
His mind drifted back to the past. He tried to remember those little moments of his childhood, blurry as they were now.
She's a good cook, though she's not very good at baking. One time she tried to make me cookies for my birthday, and it was a complete disaster.
He laughed.
Oh, and she's really got a sailor's mouth, an attitude. I have seen her tear down a man twice her size, and have him sulk away, apologizing. I think you'd like her.
Lily said, pointedly looking at Medea.
Starting to feel like I see a pattern here.
That sent Mouth laughing, and Chesney started blushing too. Medea cleared her throat.
So, you said you never met your father, right? What do you know about him?
Chesney shrugged.
Yeah, that's right. Apparently, he died just before I was born. Some kind of fishing accident. All I know is everyone loved him a lot, especially Mom. And so the town kinda looked after both of us. So it's always just been me and Mom. I don't really miss having a dad or anything.
It occurred to him just then that they actually hadn't been accosted at all on the remainder of the journey.
Hey, Lily, have you been keeping up that peace spell?
She nodded enthusiastically.
Yuppers, you bet. Dunno why it's working better now than before. Maybe we're just that little extra bit scary now after we dealt with all those big guys. Well, good work, and thank you. I think we all can agree we deserve the break.
Something about that didn't sound right. His mind felt like it was making some kind of connection, but he wasn't quite making it, and it was starting to drive him a little crazy. It affected him so much he started to slow down his walking.
Something the matter, Chesney?
Mouth asked after he almost bumped into him. Chesney stopped. Went over the conversation in his head again. Something had tweaked his mind, and now he couldn't let it go. It went on long enough that Medea said, half-jokingly,
I think he's broken?
Suddenly it clicked, and he yelled in triumph.
Ah, that was it. That's what was bugging me.
He turned sharply to Lily and grabbed her by the shoulders. She yelped in surprise, and her cheeks reddened in embarrassment at the intense stare he was giving her.
How in the world do you know peace? What do you mean?
She stammered.
When we first met, you told me you had air, fire, and light. That's fire, fire all, bolt, bolt all, escape and blow up a. How can you use peace? Woo, you forgot heart. No, you didn't say heart before.
She got a look in her face like she was concentrating, then she looked a little abashed.
Oh, I forgot. I kinda do that sometimes since I don't use it a lot.
He groaned and let go, a little self-conscious that he'd grabbed her shoulders in his moment of remembrance.
How could you possibly forget that?
She winced.
Honestly? It's kinda creepy.
Medea was interested now.
Well, since there's no spiritual teachers who can grant access to heart anymore, you were born with it, right? I'm a little curious what it does. Can you tell us? And why do you find it creepy?
She rubbed the top of the plate covering her head and listed off her answers.
Yeah, I was born with it, along with fire. Well, heart is kind of like the spirit, a soul, I guess. So all the things it does kind of work on this subtle spiritual level, and involve life. For example, peace. That's the spell that comes with heart. It works by kind of expanding the sphere of influence your soul has, subtly pushing away and influencing hostile beings. Heart and fire, the spell they bestow is called Take Life. You can use it to heal yourself by taking the life of something else.
Her expression turned a little disgusted.
I mean, it's useful in a pinch, but it sounds so ghoulish. Makes me feel like I'm a vampire or something.
She put her hands into claws and hissed, then made a disgusted face. She continued.
Heart and light together is even worse, though. You send out this pulse from your body, and anyone nearby might just instantly die. That one is called Defeat All. I was always way too scared to use it because what if I forget to exclude the people around me, you know?
Chesney did know. He was also very scared to use defeat. Couldn't imagine what being able to affect a whole area with a spell like that. That's way too much power. You could walk into a town and just, kill everyone? Without them even seeing it coming? That's horrible.
But the last one, heart and air, isn't so bad. Attack back. It kind of makes the boundary of your spirit real, in a way. And anything crossing that barrier in a hostile way, like an attack, part of it goes back and hurts them too. It is also creepy, but at least they kinda deserve it, you know? Wow.
Medea said, looking a little concerned herself.
You can just instantly kill people at a distance like that?
Lily blew a long breath of air from her lips.
Yahoo. I'm not really a big heart fan. The day I figured out my powers really scared me.
She had a long, far-off look in her eyes.
I hurt myself. One of the other kids bullied me and I fell down. Got hurt really bad. I was so scared I ran to Mom and hugged her, and she just got weaker and weaker while she was telling me it was all going to be okay.
She looked at her hands.
I didn't understand. Suddenly I was completely fine. And she fell down. I thought, well, it doesn't matter. It's not a happy memory. And then, when they took me traveling and I got to acquire light, well, that was another great day. Imagine being like a little kid, knowing that if you get upset, you might just accidentally kill everyone around you.
Medea winced.
Yeah, teaching you that at that age seems a little irresponsible.
Lily tilted her head back and forth, shrugged.
Yes. And no. I'm sure you noticed just how obscenely dangerous Esquat was when you were there. Sagos was coming to power too, and everyone was very nervous. Mom kept needing to be away for longer and longer. Dad was teaching me to fight. Well, it seemed normal at the time. I needed to be able to take care of myself.
She shook her head and plastered on a simple smile.
Anyway, I'm sorry, guys. I didn't mean to keep that from you. I promise there will be no accidents, even if I have to use this stuff. I practiced a lot. Don't worry, I trust you,
Chesney said, and the others nodded. Then he sighed.
Alright, I can't dawdle anymore. We need to get into town before it gets dark, and find out. Whatever I'm going to find out.
Mitty took his hand then and gave him a reassuring smile, offering the same support he had offered her when she stood terrified before the broken husk of her home.
It's going to be okay, I promise,
she said.
Can't be any weirder than what happened to me, right?
He felt a little guilty. His home had obviously fared better than Ratzerk had. He wondered how much it was hurting her to encourage him like this when she had just suffered so much loss. He nodded.
Thank you.
They walked in. The day was ending, and so most of the activity in Raoul was focused on preparing and preserving the catch of the day. Or it would have been. He noticed immediately that there were far more people walking around, and not doing anything than he was used to at this time of day. By rights, everyone should be down by the docks, helping haul in the catch, descaling, gutting. A Sainal passing by the entrance did a double take as he watched the four of them walk into town.
Chesney, is that you?
It was one of the residents of the town, Ellis, pretty good fisherman. Ellis practically lived in the water. Chesney couldn't believe he wasn't still out on the water.
Yeah. Hey, Ellis. Why is everyone like wandering around? Figured everyone would be dealing with the catch.
The Sainal laughed a little shrilly.
Oh yes, we would be if there was anything to catch. Some kind of disaster or whatever happened and we can barely catch enough to feed ourselves, let alone preserve any for later. We've still got stores from earlier in the quarter year, but geez. Hey, didn't you go to that fancy school thing? Is the school year over already? Well, good question there. Let's just say I'm on a break. Is Mom around? Neary? Oh sure. She's going to flip when she sees you with a couple of cute girls, though. Good luck. Oh, and welcome home.
Lily giggled, then cooed in a sultry voice.
Ooh, I've never been introduced to a boy's mother before. Should be fun. Hey, don't give his mom the wrong idea or anything.
Medea stammered.
Oh? Should I not tell her how he swooped in and scooped me off my feet, took me on an amazing adventure, saved me from certain doom? How we fought together, saved each other's lives, taught me what it means to love,
she said, acting more and more melodramatic with every half-truth. Medea turned an angry red while cursing under her breath. Chesney pinched the bridge of his nose.
Please don't tease her, she will take it out on me.
Lily, apparently delighted at the effect she was having, grinned mischievously, and then gestured dismissively.
Oh, fine, I'll be good. For now.
Mouth leaned down to stage whisper into Chesney's ear.
You picked her, remember? Yeah.
Medea made sure to stick a little too close to his side for his personal liking, but at least there wasn't a fight. He certainly did not forget the look Medea had first given him when he'd first brought Lily along. They passed by a few other townspeople. All of them commented on the girls he had with him. A few even asked if he was back just to get married. He did his best to deflect all the questions before any more trouble could brew.
Well, people here seem very jovial and nosy,
Medea said through tight lips. Chesney laughed through gritted teeth as he waved at another passerby.
Ho, just you wait. Oh, you can bet that every single time I screwed up the whole town knew. That was always a blast. The town knows everything. No secrets here. Fishing, drinking, and gossip. That's Raoul.
Finally, mercifully, they made it to his home. He stood looking at the door for almost a minute. Should he knock? Barge in? Call from outside? After a while, Lily asked innocently.
Do you live outside? Have you just been making up that you have a mom this whole time? No. Obviously. I'm just nervous. About your own front door. Just walk in. Well, yeah, but here, I'll knock.
Medea offered, and before he could protest, she leaned over and knocked.
Hello? Is anyone home?
She also made sure that she was between Chesney and Lily, and that she was holding Chesney's hand. He noticed.
What do you want? I'm in the middle of cooking. Did you finally catch something?
A woman yelled from within.
No, I'm home, Mom.
Chesney said weakly.
I can't hear a word of it. Ugh, just a second.
There was clattering and stomping, and then the door was opened. She blinked, looked down at Chesney, stood frozen for a heartbeat. She was a Laffery woman, somewhere between her mid to late 40s, somewhat on the larger side, though it seemed her clothes were looking a bit baggy recently. Her clothes were very simple, pale green with patterns of small pink flowers. Tied over it all was a stained apron. Her hair was brown, streaked with silver, tied up in a ponytail. Her eyebrows were not quite as long as other Laffery they'd seen, either.
Hi, Mom,
Chesney said, waving weakly.
Oh, my sweet boy. How did you get here? What happened?
She looked him up and down, grabbed his shoulders, and turned him about.
You got taller and stronger. What, did they toughen you up at that fancy school too? The school. Why are you home?
She seemed to notice the others finally.
Oh my, and who are these lovely ladies? Chesney, you should have sent a letter if you were going to come home with company. And is this man your teacher? I don't remember seeing him at the school.
She tilted her head.
Oh my, is everything okay? Has my son done something wrong, good sir? Please tell me he wasn't expelled.
Everyone started talking at once, all trying to explain, but Chesney put up his hands and yelled out a little louder than was possibly necessary.
Let's talk inside. Oh yes, where are my manners? Come in, all of you, please come, sit. I have some stew going, I'll just be a tick.
She ran back into the house and started opening and closing cupboards, muttering to herself and moving at double time. Awkwardly, they all sat down at a table meant for 3. Chesney ran around, finding things people could use to sit on, while his mother worked. His heart warmed and ached in equal measure on seeing his home and his mother. It looked like it hadn't changed a bit in his absence. A large set of mounted bones still hung on the wall by the hearth, a trophy Dorga had gotten after the 2 of them had gotten married. The walls were also littered with small embroidered images Neri had done to pass the time. But he felt awful for even thinking of ruining this moment by asking what he had come to ask. So he didn't. He waited patiently for his mother to turn a stew prepared for one to a meal fit for 6 or 7. The smell of the food took him back to a much simpler time in his life, and he couldn't help but feel very nostalgic for the time before he even knew he was a spiritualist. While his mother cooked, she ordered him to get refreshments, set out bowls, slice the bread, and he dutifully did them all, basking in that feeling of normalcy. Medea smiled, enjoying seeing him running around a house and being told what to do, interested to see a glimpse into his previous life. Lily made all kinds of comments about the decor, and Neri happily obliged her questions about how she loved to embroider. Before long, bowls were filled, and the table was heaped with breads and dips, and butter and preserves.
Dig in, everyone,
Neri announced, wiping the sweat from her brow.
You be sure to eat a lot, young man,
she admonished, looking over at him.
You may have gotten taller, but you've gotten quite thin and pale. Now, why don't you introduce me? Oh, right, yes. Well, this man here is Mouth. He's not a teacher. He's a famous mercenary and explorer of ancient ruins. We met. Well, maybe I'll talk about that later.
Mouth nodded.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for your hospitality, miss. It's quite welcome. As for her,
Chesney gestured to Lily.
This is Lily. She's a friend from Sasquatch. Hello, ma'am. Nice to meet you. This food is delicious, by the way. And I'm not just saying that because I haven't eaten properly for days. And, this is Medea. She's from Ratsurt, the town right beside the magic school. Hello, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you,
Medea said nervously as she bowed.
Thank you for having us. Well, my, what polite friends you have, Chesney,
Neri said, smirking slightly.
I take it this little purple-haired cutie is your girlfriend?
Both Chesney and Medea choked on their food, and the older woman laughed easily.
Oh ho, I'm not blind, you know. It's a pleasure to meet you too, Medea. And you both as well, Mouth and Lily.
Once Chesney had choked down his food and stopped his coughing fit, Neri gestured at him with her spoon and said,
Well, don't you think it's about time you explained what you're doing here? As I recall, you're not due for another break for some time.
Kittens all looked at him uneasily, but he just slowly nodded and quickly ate the rest of his soup.
There, it will be easier if I don't have to stop for bites. This is going to be a long story.
He realized this was going to be the second time he was going to go into the story with as much detail as possible within 24 hours. He wasn't sure if he even had the energy to say it all after doing it once before, and then having several fights to the death and a grueling slog through the wilderness. But he didn't give himself a choice, wouldn't let himself rest, would not accept weakness in himself. Tried not to think about how his mother would react to him telling her he destroyed the world. And so, he began the story again, for the last time, he hoped.
Well, Mom, it all started a few months ago at school.
This time in the retelling, he wasn't alone. Each of them took turns talking and adding things to his narrative for the parts where they had joined. Medea especially seemed to insist on talking about the journey, and always had a kind word to say about something he had done, or tried, or helped in some way. It was nice to feel less alone in this, to be reminded that he had a team that fully knew what was at stake, and were with him completely. To know that, despite knowing everything, he still had their full support. Still, with every new thing, he was scared to see the shifting emotions on his mother's face. With every word, his eyes were glued to every twitch of the eye and every subtle movement of her expression, waiting for the hammer of her judgment to fall on him. He spared no details. As much as he had dreaded her reaction before, now he seemed to almost need it. He felt the need to be absolutely brutally honest, almost perversely seeking her disapproval. If anyone would be fit to judge him for his crimes, it would be his mother, Neri. Often Medea would jump in after he had said something, trying to soften the blow or add context to something he had said. Medea had tried to take his hand as he spoke, but it felt wrong, and instead he held his own hands, and he couldn't help but pull on his fingers and crack them as he talked, or feel the calluses that had built there. At first, Neri was appalled, confused, almost disbelieving when he had told her of the destruction of the school, and of Dahlgren's activation and the monster's release. She asked many questions. Some he answered, others he said would be answered later in the story. Soon, as the tale got more and more complicated, her face became more and more concerned, as it dawned on her that what she was hearing was the truth, and not some story or wild imagination. She connected the dots to the fishing situation in Ray Old, the savagery of the local wildlife. She gasped and covered her mouth in horror when Chesney told her of the first person's life he ever took, down in the shadowed depths of the Temple of Raya, and then the fight with the elite soldiers in the floating temple above Geraint. Her expression turned somewhat unreadable when he recounted their first journey to Daphne, and what she told them then. Pity and sorrow when he related the journey into Sasquatch, the racism they faced there, and the massacre at the Helm Temple heritage site. And then he saw panic. Panic when he mentioned Joanne, and what Daphne had said, but she hid it quickly and forced her face to be a little too neutral. But he noticed. He could tell that she was still lost in her own thoughts, that when he related what had happened in Conchudo, it wasn't until Medea defended his actions there that she seemed to change her expression. Silent tears that she wiped away. Still, though, she remained silent and bade him to continue on. Then, on to Karen and Roki and Lokiarn and the underground. More and more amazing secrets of the world were told to her. She asked them questions again, this time mostly about the Great Ones, which they could only answer as much as they knew, which was not much. And then finally, the poisoning of Nasquat, from Dahlgren's influence, Retzerk's slow decline into madness, saving Lily, and the harrowing journey here to find his mother. He finished his story and watched her, waited to hear what her judgment of him was, of what he had done, and how he had worked to try to make right what never could be made right. She didn't react for several long moments, like she didn't think the story was yet finished, or perhaps that she was trying to process it all. The stew had long gone cold, the breads gone stale and stiff. The light outside had long ago fallen into darkest night, and all the light of the room was from 2 flickering candles. Tall, strange shadows shifted across the walls, surrounding him, watching him. At last, shakily, Neri stood, though it looked as though her legs were on the brink of failing her, to the point where Mouth and Midia stood up as well and waited to catch her if she fell. Instead, she walked around the table to him, knelt down, and held him. Haltingly, he reached up his arms to hold her back, though he felt guilty for doing so, like he shouldn't be allowed to be comforted.
I swear I'll fix it, Mom.
He started, his voice cracked, but she shushed him.
Shh! No, that's enough. That's enough hurting yourself for this, Chesney. You stop that right now. My mother knows these things.
He couldn't stop it now. The tears came. He held her tight and pressed his face into her shoulder in shame. He thought he had long ago cried all his tears over this, had long ago come to terms with the monumental task set before him. But being here in her arms, all those walls and defenses he had built up were crushed and swept aside like wet paper, and there was nothing left to hold back how scared he was. He wept and could not speak.
Shek. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Tomorrow. We'll figure it out tomorrow. What have I always told you? Worries are for the morning.
He swallowed hard and nodded. Eventually, he was able to breathe again without hiccuping. But the weariness he had been forcing back crashed down upon him, and his limbs felt like lead. What happened next was a blur to him. Hushed conversations moved furniture. He was taken to his bed, and it was as though a great weight pressed him down there and into slumber from which he could not fight off. Sleep came, and it was not without dreams. He dreamt that the skies were dark, and the world was empty and cold, and the ground shook with the sounds of something deep below gnawing upon the roots of the world.